Most people think rejection is something you're supposed to get over, like it's a phase, like once you make it, it stops happening. But that belief quietly ruins ambition, because the truth is simple and uncomfortable. If rejection disappears from your life, growth usually disappears with it. Think about how early we're trained to avoid it. You don't raise your hand unless you're sure. You don't speak unless you've rehearsed it. You don't apply unless you feel qualified. You don't post unless you're confident it will land. Slowly, without anyone ever saying it directly, a rule forms. Only act when success feels likely. It sounds responsible. It sounds mature, but it creates a hidden ceiling. Because when you only move where success is guaranteed, you never discover where your limits actually are. Here's why rejection feels so intense. It's not the outcome that hurts, it's what rejection suggests. When something fails, the brain doesn't hear, "This attempt didn't work." It hears, "Maybe you're not who you thought you were." That's why rejection feels personal, even when it isn't. And that's why most people design their lives around avoiding it. They stay just inside the lines. They shrink their ideas slightly. They delay action until confidence shows up. But confidence doesn't come first. Evidence does, and evidence requires exposure. This is where rejection goals change the entire equation. Not because rejection is fun, not because failure is noble, but because rejection destroys illusion faster than anything else. There's a moment almost everyone experiences, but very few talk about honestly. It's when something you cared about doesn't just fail quietly. It collapses. The message goes unanswered. The pitch gets declined. The post goes nowhere. The opportunity disappears. At first it feels humiliating. You replay it. You analyze every word. You wonder what it says about you. But then, if you don't run from it, something important happens. The fantasy breaks. The imagined version of success dissolves. The applause you expected never arrives. And what's left is reality. Reality is lighter. Reality tells you what you're actually willing to pursue without validation. That's how you separate real ambition from borrowed dreams. Most people never get that clarity. They assume discouragement means they chose wrong, so they quit early, or they pivot endlessly, or they stay stuck preparing forever. But discouragement isn't a stop sign. It's a filter. Rejection asks a brutal but useful question. Do you still want this when no one is watching? If the answer is no, that's clarity. If the answer is yes, that's commitment. Either way, you move forward. And this is usually where people expect the story to turn hopeful. This is where you're supposed to hear that rejection builds character, that failure makes you stronger, that it all pays off. But here's the reversal most people aren't prepared for. Rejection doesn't automatically make you better. In fact, for a lot of people, it does the opposite. It makes them smaller. They take the first few rejections personally. They start aiming lower just to be safe. They begin confusing realism with retreat. And slowly, without noticing, they build a life that never challenges them again. So let's be precise. Rejection only helps you if you use it correctly. And this is where 2026 changes the rules entirely, because in 2026, being good enough is invisible. Average output is everywhere. Polished competence is cheap. Safe ideas are automated. So if in 2026 you're not getting rejected more than ever, that's not a sign of mastery. It's a warning. It means you're operating inside what's already accepted, already crowded, already replaceable. Rejection now is proof of something very specific. It's proof you're reaching beyond what's comfortable. Proof you're operating where outcomes aren't guaranteed. Proof you're not just repeating what already works. In this environment, approval is cheap. Resistance is rare. And resistance is where growth still lives. This is why people who get rejected early often progress faster later. Not because they're fearless, not because they're special, but because fear loses leverage. Once you've been ignored, once you've been embarrassed, once you've been told no, The threat weakens. You stop waiting to feel ready. You stop protecting your ego. You stop needing permission. You move, and movement compounds. Here's the paradox most people miss. The people who look confident from the outside are usually the ones who failed publicly the most. Not because failure made them arrogant, but because it made them accurate. Every rejection sharpened something real. Clarity, execution, positioning, not motivation. Not affirmations, skill. Meanwhile, people who rarely face rejection often live on fragile confidence. As long as things go well, they're fine. But the moment something doesn't work, they freeze. Because they never built tolerance for resistance. This is why rejection goals work. When rejection is the target, no stops meaning failure. No means you aimed high enough to collide with reality. That changes how you behave. You stop asking, will this work? You start asking, is this ambitious enough to fail? That single question separates spectators from builders. Interesting work doesn't land cleanly. It offends someone, confuses someone, gets ignored before it gets understood. You can't separate originality from rejection. They arrive together, so the goal isn't to eliminate fear. Fear stays. The goal is to stop obeying it, to build a life where rejection is normal, where it's just data, just feedback, just another rep. Because once rejection stops feeling like a verdict, it becomes what it always was, information. And people who treat it that way end up building things most people only think about. Not because they believed harder, but because they were willing to let their dreams get crushed, especially now, and rebuild them sharper, stronger, and real.